Good morning, folks. It's the week ahead on NorthstarNews.com, our Sunday morning review of what we're facing in this nation in the coming weeks. And as usual, I have our NorthstarNews.com legal analyst, Rob Tarver, on with me this morning. Good morning, brother.
Good morning, brother. It's good to be with you, and I'm happy to be with you. Happy to be with our North Star premier political analyst, Walter Fields, who is no stranger to the politics of this nation. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say about what we have been through this week.
And I want folks to know that this is a casual conversation. I'll tell you how casual it is. So our legal analyst is in, a nice jacket and shirt. I'm repping in my Morgan State hoodie. And if you look over my shoulder, that's a vacuum cleaner. It doesn't get more real than that. Like, we ain't trying to put on air.
And he's drinking lemonade, too.
Exactly. Lemonade on a Sunday morning. So we're going to keep it really real this morning.
Right.
But we've got a lot going on. And so, we're looking at the Biden administration, and President Biden has come in with a lightning pen and just use executive orders to basically undo a lot of the damage that Donald Trump had done through his executive authority. And I think it's pretty amazing. And some of these executive orders, they're not just symbolic, they're pretty significant. And so when you look at them, things like making sure that the U.S. Rejoins the World Health Organization, making sure that we become part of the Paris Climate Agreement again. Those are significant steps to make sure that we restore our standing internationally. And so, what are some of the other things you're seeing Biden do through these executive orders?
Well, interesting. There were the basic ones that I think everyone expected. In other words, as you said, the World Health Organization, also rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. But there are some other ones that I think are really important. You mentioned some that were symbolic, and I think symbolism is important in this day and time. So there's one great executive order, which is a memorandum condemning and combating racism and intolerance against Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and other people in the United States. And the reason why that's important is it's important to recognize at this point that this is an administration that stands squarely against racial intolerance and things of that nature. Some of the other things that were really important, the moratorium on student loans. In other words, student loan debt hasn't been canceled as many people had hoped, but the moratorium on paying student loan debt has been extended. And the reason why that's important is that also stops the interest on student loans, which of course is one of the things that really kills people left and right. There is an executive order that protects the federal workforce. It restores collective bargaining power. And this is really important because for years, Republicans have sought to gut the power of unions in the workplace. Great thing about this executive order is it recognizes and gives minimum protections for workers, federal workers who are in collective bargaining agreements. And lastly, what I think is important is the extension of evictions and foreclosure moratoriums. Americans are hurting right now. They're hurting financially. And one of the biggest problems is being able to muster and garner the funds to be able to stay in your home. And this is one way of ensuring that until we get this pandemic under control, it really gets a grip on being able to just put a stop to people losing their homes and apartments.
And I think that's an important thing to note, because I think for the Black community, we really need to understand the use of these executive orders. So the president cannot, by the stroke of a pen, just create new programs and mandate new spending. These executive orders are really addressing pre-existing issues that through the office of the president, through executive power, that he can intervene. Because I've seen a lot of comments on Facebook about, well, what about reparations? Well, the president of the United States cannot sign an executive order authorizing reparations. Reparations has to take place through Congress. Congress has the ability to authorize spending. And so if we're really talking about that issue, we have to look at Congress. There is a bill before Congress to create a reparations study commission. And so we need to be focused with this new administration and not have these undue expectations about what a president can or cannot do. You know, President Biden has, rightly so, used executive orders in a way to minimize a lot of what was happening in the prior administration to delegitimize our federal government. And
And that's
so,
what's important. You know, I don't want to
no,
cut you
no,
off,
no,
but
go.
what I think is really important is people don't understand. There has been some flack about, I think it's 40 something, 42 at this point, executive orders. Even the New York Times, which tends to move progressive to left, basically says ease up on executive orders, Joe. Well, the fact of the matter is those executive orders are important to undo most of the damage that had been done. And a lot of the damage is on immediate damage.
Yes.
For example, one of the executive orders is to create more vaccination sites. Now, the reason why that's important, of course, is we've now learned that the prior president, Donald Trump, did absolutely nothing to advance vaccination in this country. I mean, what happened with this prior administration with vaccination and vaccination sites and vaccination preparation is criminal. And that's why you have to move forward with all speed that you can in order to get that up. And that's why the executive order process is important.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would tell the folks in the Biden administration, the optics were a little crazy when he's at the desk and he has a stack of executive orders, right? And and so it gives the impression that the Biden administration is simply going to use executive orders to govern the country. And that's not true. I think what he's trying to do is to sort of clear the plate of all the garbage that he inherited. So, you're going to stop spending money on that wall between Mexico, right? Because, first of all, we're still waiting on the check from Mexico to pay for that wall as was promised. So, that was one of the executive orders. Now, the other thing that he did this past week, he opened up Obamacare enrollment again. So at a time when we're facing this pandemic, the idea that enrollment had been cut off from the one way many Americans could get health care was ludicrous. So opening up enrollment again for the Affordable Care Act is really important at this point in time when we're facing this deadly pandemic. So, we're seeing the Biden administration roll out the executive orders, but at the same time, we can't lose sight of the fact that we've got an impending impeachment trial that's going on in the Senate. And a lot of the news that's coming out, I am now convinced that the Democrats understand that Donald Trump will likely be acquitted. And I think their strategy now is we are going to put on this trial because now it's going to be a trial of the Republican Party. And when you start to see the news that's coming out, the fact that they're now charging people with conspiracy is significant. And, you might want to share with folks the significance of that charge because it moves this investigation into a totally different realm.
It does. What we had seen so far with regard to the people who were involved in the insurrection were individual charges. Those individuals were charged with various things pertaining to their actions on January the 6th. Well, just recently, the federal government made decisions to charge conspiracy. And conspiracy simply means, in the legal terms, that you agree with at least one other person to do something that's criminal and that you take some form of overt act in moving that thing forward. Now, the importance of a conspiracy charge is simply this. It allows you to assess the behavior of all of the individuals as one pattern and practice of conduct. And what that does from an investigative point of view, you now are looking at everything that each of these individuals have done together. And so you will find that the scope of the investigation, when you charge conspiracy, broadens significantly. And this is really important because the fact of the matter is the FBI has more tools. Having been a person who has tried cases on the federal level, I can tell you the FBI has more tools than people understand. And they will be in emails, they will be in social media, they will be in other contacts, they will be everywhere over all these people. What you have seen recently, and it hasn't gotten much attention, is that the FBI and other agencies have started looking into money that flowed into a lot of the organizations who were involved in the insurrection prior to the insurrection, which shows in some measure that there may have been a conscious scheme and plan to do what they did. Now we're seeing all kinds of things come out. And Walter, just to get back to what you said, this is why I think the trial is so important. And I think you hit on something really important. The Democrats have decided the calculus is that this is more important than Donald Trump. This really is about exposing the Republican Party for what they have become. And you and I are old TV guys. You know, way back in the day, we started with MSNBC and other networks and things like that. We know the importance of branding. And I believe that it's an important step for the Democrats to brand the party as to who they are and make people draw lines as to where they stand.
Absolutely. And I think folks need to read between the lines now when they read some of the reporting on this trial. So we're beginning to see bits and pieces revealed to the American public. So we're learning more that people had walkie-talkies and communications equipment at this riot, right? So there was some communications between folks. This wasn't just done out of happenstance. Folks understood how to penetrate the Capitol building. Folks understood where to go. We have the famous video of the woman with the megaphone telling people, go through this window and there's a room below. Well, you only know that if you've been told that. And so when, you know, Speaker Pelosi talks about the enemy within, I think the other thing that they are setting up is a situation that's going to be very uncomfortable for Republican members of Congress, because clearly there was some communication between someone inside and some of these folks outside for them to know precisely where to go in the Capitol building, which is a very hard building. It's a massive building. And for security reasons, they don't really number or name offices in the US Capitol building. Like, you have to really know where you're going. And so the idea that you could have this type of penetration into this building, and now they're charging people with conspiracy, I think in this trial, it's going to become very uncomfortable for Republicans, because when the Democrats produce their evidence, and there's a lot of it, you have all of the video evidence, and we're seeing more video now than we initially saw. So through the Justice Department, they've secured video from folks. And so now we're seeing an inside look into how violent this really was. And yesterday it was reported that, you know, they found video of a woman who was in the Capitol, apparently a video message she sent to her daughter saying, you know, we penetrated the building, and something to the effect of, you know, we're going to find Nancy Pelosi and put a friggin' bullet in her head. So all of this is coming out now. And Republicans are going to have to sit through this trial while this evidence is presented, while America sees this video, while you have witnesses like the shaman with the horns, who is now saying publicly through his lawyers that the only reason he was there was because he was following the direct orders of Donald Trump. Like, Donald Trump told us to come to Washington. And so this trial, you're going to see a lot of sweat on people's brows, Republicans' brows, because it's going to be tough to sit there. And the other thing that's been done, and I won't say this is being done purely for political purposes, but it's going to have a political impact, that the body of the officer who died is going to lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda. That's going to be an uncomfortable moment for Republicans, because how do you show up and show respects when you made statements defending these folks who attacked the Capitol? And I just think the next 7 to 10 days, there's going to be some truth telling in Washington, D.C. that we haven't ever witnessed in our lifetime. So,
well, you say uncomfortable, but they've managed to get through some very uncomfortable moments without making a change in how they approach. We saw Kevin McCarthy traveling down to Florida to meet with Donald Trump this week, knowing that the optics of doing that are such that it would show that he was aligned with Donald Trump. Nobody thinks that he went down there to chastise him. Everybody knows that this really was a kiss the ring moment for him. But you know, we talk about uncomfortable moments. Let's take a look back at the week that we passed through. One of the things I thought was really significant is we're starting to see some real fracturing, even within the right-wing fringe areas of the Republican Party. This past week, Enrique Tarrio was outed for being an informant for the FBI. And I'll tell you what's really interesting with that is a person who has negotiated those types of deals with people to work with the FBI. Of course, this thing dealt with a 2014 matter that was drug related in Florida many years ago. But once you become an informant, I will tell you this, you are always in some measure available to the persons that you worked for. Absolutely. And I would not be surprised at all if Mr. Tarrio is still working with federal agents in dealing with the Proud Boys and other organizations who moved forward. And that may be an important part of how they move forward in this trial. Some of the information that comes from, to the government is going to come through informants, people who have never been arrested before. And you know what? Mike Tyson said, what? Everybody's got a plan till they get smacked in the mouth. Well, you know what? Everybody's got a plan till they get arrested by the FBI or the government. And once they get arrested, they become Luther Vandross and really just start to sing in keys that you never heard before. So I'm telling you right now, I believe there will be people who cooperate. I've seen it firsthand over and over again in my 35 years of practice. Some of the toughest guys that you think are the toughest guys are out there cooperating.
Well, look, even if he is not an informant at this time, just labeling him as such fractures this movement, because now this movement is looking at itself saying, well, who else amongst us has been informing on us, right? And so the reporting over the last week was interesting because you had all of these folks who had aligned with the QAnon movement, who are coming out publicly saying that they felt betrayed because Donald Trump abandoned him, right? The first abandonment was when he didn't march down to the Capitol with it. He said, I'm going down there with you, and he abandoned him. Then the second abandonment was that video that he did immediately thereafter. And so, I think that this
has far exceeded Trump's position. Walt, I think we lost you for a second there.
Yeah, lost me for a second, but I'm back.
But I was just going over one of the things thoughts that I had, which is that, we've been so quick over the past few months and even years to talk about Trumpism and how Donald Trump is responsible for this and Donald Trump this and that. But the fact of the matter is, when you say that the senators and congressmen and other politicians are afraid of Donald Trump, it lets them off the hook. This is not fear of Donald Trump. This is a recognition of what the party has become and who those politicians are. They are, in fact, supporters of white nationalism by their actions. They are, in fact, a ultra right-wing party at this juncture. And we should no longer talk about them being held hostage and being good people that perhaps whisper on one side that we don't really go along with this and then vote in another way. You know what? They did that a long time ago. White America has been famous for those types of actions, whispering about segregation, yet voting one way, whispering about lynching, and yet doing something different. All those things have to be really called to task at this point.
Oh, absolutely. And we've already made a decision at NorthstarNews.com that if the Republicans fail to convict Donald Trump, we will forever refer to them from point going forward as a white nationalist party, because that's who they are. And I think you're absolutely right. I think we have allowed people to hide behind this notion that because of the pressure that they are receiving from Donald Trump, that they cannot tell the truth. When the fact of the matter is they are aligned with the very philosophy that Donald Trump has espoused. And so, you have members of Congress who are just as responsible for the mayhem that took place at the Capitol as is Donald Trump. And this is why I think the Democrats are doing the right thing by pushing this trial forward, because the country needs to see this on full display. And the world needs to see this. And quite honestly, I think much of this is more for the sake of our global allies than it isn't even for American citizens, because I think people have always looked to the United States, knowing that it's a flawed democracy. But in terms of the ability to govern, the terms of ability to have peaceful transfer of government, we were the model that the world held up. And now that reputation has been severely damaged. So how can you be on the world stage being critical of other nations, right? When you're the
Yeah.
United States of America, the economic power of the world, the political power of the world, and you can't even go from election to election without having something like what occurred at the Capitol happen. So, as we move ahead, we're going to look at this trial. We're going to keep our focus on the actions of the Biden administration. And, folks should understand that, we are not going to be passive observers of the Biden-Harris administration. We will critique the Biden-Harris administration the same way we critique all previous administrations since NorthstarNews.com has been in existence in 2002. So, our aim here is to educate the Black community, to keep us informed, and to also position us to better understand public policy and its impact on our day-to-day lives.
To that end, Walt, let me ask you, and I'm going to put you on the spot, but I love doing that. What are the implications of this trial, the Senate trial, for Black Americans?
Well, here's where I think the greatest implication is. The United States Senate has been the one chamber of Congress that it has been very difficult for African Americans to penetrate. When you look at the history of Congress, we've only had a handful of Black senators. And one of the reasons why is because, unlike the House of Representatives, the Senate is a seat it's a statewide seat that you have to win. And we found it very difficult to get statewide support for Black candidates. That's why having Reverend Raphael Warnock represent Georgia is such a big deal, because it is so difficult for African Americans to win statewide. And so when you look at the United States Senate, it really is a white male body. So I think one of the significant things for the African American community is we're going to get a real understanding of how the Senate operates and the significance of the Senate. When you start talking about judicial appointments, that's the United States Senate. It's not the House of Representatives. So when you start looking at who's on the bench in the federal judiciary, well, those senators put those judges there. And so until we understand the power of the Senate and its implications on our day-to-day lives, and by the way, the judiciary is the one area where Donald Trump did a lot of damage in terms of the numbers of judges he appointed.
And that damage will last throughout our lifetime.
Oh, without a doubt, because the one thing he did was they made sure that they appointed young judges to the bench. Mm-hmm. That's a lifetime appointment. So if you're in your late 40s and you get appointed to the federal bench, you have a 30-year run. And so, part of what we need to understand, and I think the significance is for African Americans, we've got to better understand our government. And so this trial is going to give us that. But I think it's also going to give us an understanding that we better work to make sure that we start electing folks to this body of Congress, because it matters. So, I'm looking forward to the trial because senators will have an opportunity to ask questions. I think most of the senators who are Black, and I'm only considering two of them, Cory Booker and Raphael Warnock, will have an opportunity to raise some very uncomfortable issues of their Republican counterparts as to why the party has aligned itself with white extremism in America. How can you be a party that's supposed to represent American citizens and you have people who believe that the Confederate flag and a flag devoted to a president are more important than the American flag? Like, all the hypocrisy is going to come out.
Here's my thought about that. If nothing else, this trial must represent a wake-up call to Black America. And the wake-up call has to be that where in years before, a lot of racism has masqueraded as conservatism. And I want to be very clear, they are not the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can respect conservatism. I cannot respect racism cloaked as conservatism. And that's what has happened in years before. But now the cloak has been ripped off. And so many of the people who acted in a certain way were closet racists, hiding behind conservatism. And it's important that we see that there are more numbers than you even ever believed of people who stand behind the white nationalist, racist, sexist, xenophobic philosophy that's now in front of America. So this trial represents a real chance to really see exactly what we are up against. If nothing else showed what we were up against, this is really the chance to see it. And I think it's really important, as you said, when you look at the two senators who are there, who are African American, hopefully they will get a chance to make sure that this discussion, this trial, gets steered in the direction of making sure that it is clear that much of what has happened is racially based. I mean, as I sit there and I listen to the disgruntled individuals who stormed the Capitol, I'm always scratching my head and saying, what are you really disgruntled about? Mm-hmm. What are you really? I mean, you know, we had CEOs, people who ran companies, you know, basically storming the Capitol. What are you disgruntled about? Well, they're disgruntled because they believe their position in society is being taken away. They see it slipping away. And that's what we have to confront. But I want to move to another area here real quick, because I want to make sure that we discuss some of the real craziness that has gone on this week. And craziness has a name in Washington. And right now that name is Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Oh yeah, she's full-blown cuckoo. Look, the fact that you have someone sitting in Congress who believes, or says she believes, that Jews have built a laser in space, right? When you hear that type of lunacy, you begin to understand how paranoia and extremism have become so entangled with Republican Party politics that this person, who they allowed to be appointed to the Education Committee, is actually a member of Congress. So bizarre that you have a Black member of Congress who says, I need to move my office because I don't want to be next to this crazy person who wants to bring a gun into the United States Capitol. But this goes to your point, though, of how so much of this extremism has been masked as being conservative. And it's not conservative. Like the name that I hope some Democrat brings up during this trial is Herman Cain. Herman Cain was a Black business executive who was a true fiscal conservative. Herman Cain has been completely forgotten because he was not important to them at all. He was being used to try to seduce Black people into believing that the conservatism these extremists were espousing was the conservatism of Black people like Herman Cain. It was not. And that's why Herman Cain's name has never been referenced since his death. And so I think it's important at this point for us to understand and to differentiate between conservatism as an ideology and the wackiness of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are trying to use that as an excuse to cover up their racism, because that's all it is. It's fundamental racism. And we should be able to say that, and we should be able to talk about it in a way. You know, we started using terms in the last decade like microaggression. There's no such thing as a microaggression. This is just racism. Like when you have someone like this who is in Congress, who, and look, whether or not she believes any of what she says, to me is not the issue. What's the issue is that she says it.
Yeah.
So if you say it, I'm going to take your word for it that that's what you stand for. And so,
you know, just a few years ago, Steve Scalise made racist comments. It was so soon, you know, so recent. He made these racist comments, and he was immediately condemned by the Republican caucus. And Why are they so hesitant to even say anything about this?
Because I believe that they have the same racist mentality as Marjorie Taylor Greene. Look, it's very interesting that the group of Republicans who are no longer holding office, people like, Paul Ryan and other folks who once held high office in Congress, have all critiqued Donald Trump, have all talked about the dangers of what's happening within the party. But those who are currently in power have been silent. And that's because this has been the fuel that got them to where they are. And so, part of this is, we were hoping that they would run out of fuel once Trump is no longer in office. And some of them are just simply refueling. Some of them are simply just pulling back up to the tank and refueling up again on racism. And the question is going to be, and I really think the questions has already been answered, the majority of Americans do not support this. It's reflected in the vote tally for this last election. It's reflected in all the polling that says the overwhelming majority of Americans want Donald Trump to be convicted. What we have right now is just a solid block of racist extremists who have taken over the Republican Party and are attempting to inject chaos into our country for the sake of really interrupting any opportunity to increase progress in terms of issues of social justice. And we need to be clear about that, because this isn't everybody in America, wasn't on the lawn of the Capitol. There's just a solid block of racists that have to be broken. And I think it's already beginning to happen, because the other news that we're hearing across the country, how many Republicans have dropped their party affiliation because they don't want to be associated with this. And in places like Arizona,
I think there were 9,000 people who actually dropped their
registration. And that's going on across the country.
I'll tell you what occurs to me about that. You have 9,000 people who affirmatively either took the time to go online or in person to drop their registration. That's the number of people who actually took the action. How many more people didn't have the time or the energy or the inclination to do that online, but have said in their minds, I'm disassociating myself from that. I think you've got to take that number of 9,000 and at least triple it, if not more. And so this is a point for the Democrats for the Republicans to recognize that they've got some really serious problems going forward, particularly if the Democrats continue to amplify what the party now stands for.
Well, the biggest audience for this trial, I think, are going to be independent voters. So you have a huge block of independent voters in America, neither Democrat or Republican, who are going to look at this trial and say, we will never give consideration to a Republican candidate again. Mm-hmm. What the Republican Party is getting ready to walk into is creating a permanent minority extremist position in American politics, which will make it very difficult for them to gain any traction nationally. And it's becoming more difficult even for them to gain traction in states that they traditionally have been solid, like in the South. When you start to see states like Georgia elect Democrats and elect Black Democrats, when you start to see Black Democrats running in South Carolina and being extremely competitive, you begin to understand that the Republican bloc is being chiseled away at. Yeah. And so, I think the Democratic Party understands this, because you don't have to have all Democrats on your side. As long as you get the majority of Democrats and the majority of independents, you can control politics in this country. And the Republican Party is risking any opportunity to convince independents to be supportive of their platform, because they've allowed this racist element to be front and centered. So, we're going to see this week coming up what happens, and next Sunday we'll check back in. And
I got to touch one thing that has happened this week that I think is really interesting. You and I have talked about, and it deals with the trial. Your former president, Donald Trump, he had assembled a legal team, and that legal team that he assembled, they seem to have fallen apart. the team
Well,
that he's
look,
assembled for the trial.
They haven't fallen apart. Let's be real. We got folks running away from Donald Trump, right? Because any lawyer with half their common sense understands the implications of representing this man. And
here's what happened, so it's clear. The attorneys who were involved, and two notable attorneys from South Carolina and others, 5 attorneys left Donald Trump's defense for this Senate trial. And they left ostensibly because Donald Trump wanted them to go in the direction of challenging the election results and to put that front and center as an issue of his defense. Those lawyers weren't willing to do that. And I think in large part, they weren't willing to do it. Number one, because as an advocate, you cannot, as an attorney, advance frivolous arguments. And at this point, with 59 opinions against you and only 1 success, it's very clear that any argument that Donald Trump won this election is frivolous. And once you do that as a lawyer, you subject yourself to sanction or possible disbarment, depending on how bad it is. And I'm very proud of those lawyers to have said, with regard to advancing that argument, we're not going to do it.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think you reach a point where you have to understand the implications for your professional career. And so, you know, you have a situation where you have a former president whose only defense is a fabrication. And so how do you represent someone like that? You cannot go into this trial espousing a theory that this election was stolen, because there's so much evidence against that. And so I think for any lawyer who has any ounce of moral character, they are not going to put themselves in that position of risking disbarment. I think Trump will find a lawyer, a Rudy Giuliani type, who they will compensate, who will basically be a poster child for the type of legal shenanigans that have become prominent during the Trump era.
Rudy this week got even too crazy for Steve Bannon. He appeared on Steve Bannon's show and accused Antifa and the Lincoln Project of actually orchestrating the insurrection that happened at the Capitol. And Steve Bannon even had to come back and say, whoa, come on, man. You're going too far out there.
But the thing about crazy, once you go out there, you have to stay out there. Like, there's no way for them to peel back the crazy, because you've been out there so far. If you peel it back, then you really expose yourself as a fraud. And Giuliani has been so out there that there's no place for him to go except further out there, because he has to keep that line up. Because if he doesn't, then we know Rudy, we all know he's a fraud anyway, but then he becomes a public fraud. So we'll see. We'll see what's going to happen. We're going to check back in next Sunday and update folks. But this is the week ahead, and we hope everyone has a good week. This is Walter Fields signing off from NorthstarNews.com.
Rob Tarver doing the same. Stay safe.
Have a good week.